Salam Sejahtera and a very good afternoon to our honorable speakers, Dr. Muhammad Tajuddin, Dr. Soong, and Dr. Helen Ting. And our moderator today, Mr. K. Arumugam. Salam mesra to greet all attendees in this Zoom meeting room and our FB audience too. First of all, on behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to thank you everyone for allocating your time to join this online English forum today. And for your information, this online forum is one of the many programs scheduled by LLG Cultural Development Centre for this year, 2021, to commemorate the 120th birth anniversary of the late Mr. Lim Lian Geok, and also the 60th anniversary of his citizenship revocation. So that's why we call 120 and 60. 12060. Next slide. This is what we call 120-60. So Mr. Lim Lian Geok is the most revered Chinese educationist in Malaysia history, a pioneer in a civil society movement. The next slide. He dedicated himself towards the Chinese education movement in Malaysia and fight for the cause of social justice and equality. So in 1960, Mr. Lim led a movement to oppose the Rahman Talib report, which had recommended that the medium of instruction in secondary school will be in either English or Bahasa Malaysia. So the movement believed such recommendation would eventually lead to the abolition of Chinese secondary schools. So the next slide, we can see this had resulted in his citizenship being revoked on August 12, 1961 by the then Home Minister. His teaching permit was also being unjustly revoked in the same year. At the end, after a 3-year legal battle to retain his citizenship, but failed. Today, 23rd of October, is the date of his citizenship was officially revoked. So Mr. Lim passed away in 1985 as a stateless man. So the Chinese community bestowed upon him the singular and rare honor. The next slide, we can see the photo of Mr. Lim passed away in 1985. And then the next slide, we honorable him as the soul of the Malaysian Chinese. So today we are here honorable that our panelists, they agree to come on board to share their experience and insights. Today's forum, we will highlight several issues such as promoting education opportunity, equality, and the importance of mother tongue education in a multicultural society. So before we move further, let me pass the mic to our moderator today, Mr. K. Arumugam. Mr. Aru is the president of Tamil Forum Malaysia. So let us give him a round of applause using the reaction button. Okay, welcome, Mr. Aru.
Thank you very much, Ms. Leong. Welcome to this forum. This forum is very lively forum. It talks about the most important topic, the debate in Malaysia, the education, the way forward. What has education done to us, and how are we going to move forward? As earlier, what we heard about the founder of the main character of today's forum, that his citizenship was stripped off because of his fight for mother tongue education in this country. That speaks volumes of what we ought to be aware of in relation to education and people who have sacrificed their citizenship just simply because they wanted the right thing to be done. After 60 years, as we see today, that how necessary was mother tongue education. International reports, including UNESCO reports, UNDP reports, all tend to indicate the importance of mother tongue education, at least at the formative years. The relevance of mother tongue education in relation to a country's growth is so relevant that we need to look into the diversity of education as a holistic approach of developing the human capital. In this context, today we have three prominent speakers from academic background as well as human rights background, and what I can also call in terms of a person who is so well versed and highly prominent in the field of architecture. He has done his degree, master's, PhD, hundreds of papers, holding various positions nationally and internationally. He is no other than Professor Muhammad Tajuddin Muhammad Rasdi, and we welcome here with us today, and he will be sharing his views and opinions in relation to the topic of today, that is what is education and how relevant is mother tongue education and what is the way forward. We have another second speaker is Dr. Soong. I think the country is well aware of Dr. Kwa's contribution in the field of education as well as human rights. He is one of the furious defender of human rights. His 445 days in the Kemunting also allowed him to learn the new perspective of Malaysian politics as well as life. He is very, very bold. He has written more than 30-40 books. I wanted to say how many books he wrote, because every other day he kind of publishes a book. Not literally, but he's a ferocious writer. He has penned down so much, and he's a person behind the formation of Swaram. Swaram is a human rights organization, and I feel proud to be also linked with that organization and serving as a current director as well. Then we have Dr. Helen Ting with us. Helen Ting actually has done very impressive studies, and her research interest is politics and national identity. Actually, national identity is one of the most important concepts now, because we are looking into the, even when we look at the education blueprint, it tends to talk about identity. Where do we move from the ethnic line to a national line? Can we actually develop that? But I think she kind of looks into social relations, identity as an agency, ethnicity, religion, gender, diverse topics she has entered into. And she is also members and editorial board in the Malaysian Journal of Chinese Studies, and she's a renowned academic, and she has massively contributed in the Gabungan Bertinda Malaysia's documents that we create in relation to development and education and things like that. So we have three prominent speakers. Before I proceed to welcome any one of them, I would like to ask them which one of them would like to go first. Oh, Prof. Okay, this is like so eager. I think we are also very eagerly waiting to hear what he is going to say. Okay, the floor is yours, Prof. You can take it now.
How many minutes do I speak first? 10 or 10 minutes, right?
Prof, you do have about 20 minutes to
great.
discuss. If you can spare some time in between, then you can pause. Otherwise, you can go on.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to this forum. Like or unlike Soong, I also live in Kemunting, but not in the prison lah. my parents' house, my father built his house there, and I usually go to pray at the Kemunting ISA mosque at one time. So I also have an uncle who is a warder there, so all set for Kemunting, so no stranger. Today I would like to actually talk about a theme which I have been developing a lot in terms of education. Now, I know today is about mother tongue, but what I'm going to say, actually, I wasn't going to speak about mother tongue, but I'm going to talk about what I feel education is needed in the global construct. So first and foremost, when we developed our education system, it was in the 60s, and no one can imagine that you have this kind of communication where you can speak to someone right across the world in a single forum just like that. So we never imagined such things. And so we rightly or wrongly, what we thought was that we should have a single kind of language, let's say Bahasa Malaysia, and then that would unite us and so forth. And we say we should put a kind of a stay on the other traditions and things like that. I mean, rightly or wrongly, that was the decision then. But I know now that that is not the right decision today. Okay, it could have been correct then. It could have been, and I'm afraid Mr. Lim Lian Geok was out of his time at that situation. Although he could have been a visionary because of his philosophical construct. Now, what do we have in the present? In the present, when I look at our education system, being a professor at university, and looking at what is being focused in the university and what have been focused for my children in the public schools, I came to the conclusion that there is one thing that we did not teach, which is something which is absolutely important, and not only to be living in a multicultural country like Malaysia, but in a global construct. I mean, here to talk about an education, whether university or whether in a school, in the construct of a small nation, is really, to me, quite laughable, because we are now in a global construct, like it or not. The virus taught us that. 1.5 years or more than 1.5 years, we've been pinned down by the virus that spread throughout the global situation with the advent of transport, lifestyle, and most of us are living almost in the same manner. And then we had to adjust ourselves, and having this kind of meeting with this Zoom platform that had now become a totally different game altogether. So when we talk about whatever we want to talk about, whether we want to talk about employability of our children, whether we want to talk about peace and harmony between us, we cannot disassociate ourselves from the global construct. And so I came to the conclusion that we are having a lot of conflicts because we left out one very essential element that I learned actually from a Buddhist lecture by the Venerable Ajahn Brahm, who asked the question, who is the most important person in the world? If all of us can answer that question, then and only then can we have peace in this world. Because the question that he asked, who is the most important person in the world, is the person in front of you. Meaning that at any one time, someone will be in front of you. And at any one time, that person, whoever he or she is the most important person in the world. So that means we have left out the idea of giving dignity to others. We teach like, I'm a Malay, I'm a Muslim, and I'm a Malaysian. But in most a situation where you are taught to be a Muslim and a Malay, or you're taught to be a Christian and a Chinese, or an Indian and Hindu. So when we teach in this manner, we seem to be giving only the dignity to our own kind, and seems to treat others as number 3 or number 4 or whatever. Now, this philosophy construct about giving dignity to others, I found is a very high spiritual awareness, where you do not feel yourself to be better than others, whether you do not feel that you will be going to heaven and everybody else is going to hell, because all this kind of perception is completely and absolutely wrong. but that is what we teach. If you follow a certain way, then you will go to heaven. If you follow a certain way, then you are the good person. This is what is being taught to us. Fine, if you are going to use that, but then how do you look at others? And here comes the question, what about the tradition of others? Never mind talking about language or culture or lifestyle or faith, we're talking about tradition. So when we talk about tradition, the first thing that we need to do is how do we insert into our religious education, formal education, professional education, the idea of treating others with dignity. Like the question that Ajahn Brahm asked, who is the most important person in the world? It is the one in front of you. So if we can teach this aspect of menghormati tradisi lain ataupun what we call giving respect, due respect to other traditions, then we can simply see that tradition is a very important element, which is the second point of any education construct, is self-awareness of the person. Before we give dignity to others, we need to know who we are as a person within the traditional construct of our own society, of our race, of our own religious faith, and so forth. And that's fine. We need to have that first. Once we have identified that, the key is that don't be bigoted about it, because this is the wrong spiritual construct. But unfortunately, this is how it is taught. You must be more Muslim, you must be more Malay, you must be more this, and you must. That's actually not the spiritual. It is to be more humble. Okay, so that means if we are self-aware with our own tradition, and the key about the understanding of our own tradition obviously has to be our own language, which is our own mother tongue language. Now, I was not educated with the mother tongue. I was educated in English. Okay, and I have grown in career, in understanding and awareness and a lot of things with another language. It is only now that I begin to read about being Malay. Being a Muslim, I've read a lot and I can stand my ground on that. But being a Malay is a problem to me because I was never really indoctrinated within a Malay. Of course, I live in a Malay, a kind of a society, but not in a kampong. So now I begin to understand, and that is where when I read the work of Hang Tuah and saw that he had to understand 12 languages. Why do you have to memorize 12? I mean, learn 12 languages? Because the Malay world was a cosmopolitan place. It is a global construct. Kasim Ahmad, at the back of the book that he edited for Dewan Bahasa, Hikayat Hang Tuah, identified the words of the Malay language within 9 civilizations. You're looking about Javanese, you're looking at Arabic, you're looking at Tamil, a lot of Tamil words, such as roti, makan, and gemerlapan, ratna mutu manikam. What is this ratna mutu manikam? Must be very shiny lah, you know. So apparently it is that. And when I read the Bahasa Malaysia of now, I discovered the loss of all those classic language, kulakasa, and the different meaning of the word perintah. We lost a lot of it. And now we are only more Englishized. We are neither here nor there in the Bahasa Malaysia, which I describe now as a very mechanical language. It is lost its tradition of laden with a lot of its culture, because language cannot be separated from the culture. So my point here is that, number one, we need to educate about giving dignity to all traditions. But we are taught to honor only our own tradition and treat others as a second, third, and fourth. That is wrong socially, wrong economically, wrong spiritually. You name it, it's wrong. Okay, took me a very long time to understand and come to the conclusion on my own. I didn't read anywhere. But I saw that no, this is not the right way to do it. So when we have this idea, and then we must understand that we cannot use such thing like which tradition is more important than us, which tradition is not better than us. We cannot be asking these kinds of questions. If you say no, we need to evaluate ourselves against others so that we know that we are better. Well, then I say it's like you're differentiating your children. If you have 5 children with different characteristics, then you are placing preference over one child over the other. If you can do that, then you are a lousy parent, because you cannot do that. You have to accept all the children within their own construct of lifestyle that they have chosen. So here is a situation where we need to also understand that all these traditions are like jewels, where they have their wisdom. They have even certain thing that they have done to, say, thousands of years practicing certain, say, medication. There's a lot of secrets that are inherent in all the traditions of the world. There is a verse in the Quran. It says God created people in different ways and different lifestyles, so that you may know each other. Now, there are 2 messages there that I discovered on my own. Number one, we need each other. That's why God created us, so that we need each other. Because if we don't need each other, then we are a rival to God. Because we don't need each other. Means you don't need another people, then that means you are God lah. Okay, so that cannot be it. So we are designed so that we need each other. And the second thing is that by needing each other, that there are things which others possess that can combine to be a whole to us. Now, this is a very difficult. Wow, you say, Prof. Tajuddin, Malays have to learn from Chinese. Yes. What's wrong with that? Wow, you say we have to learn from Tamil. Well, what's wrong with that? You don't learn from it now. You don't have your professor from India or professor from China, and you don't get your Sinovac from what? From Perlis, is it? Okay. So what are you talking about here? Okay. So to me, the idea of the mother tongue language is something which is needed in a modern construct of a globalized education. And finally, we would have to say things like, we are educating for the world or just for some place in Malaysia. Yes, we started with trying to put our children as into the industry so that to grow the country. Fine lah, but we did it already. Cukup lah. Okay, so now we are looking at the global construct, and our agenda and the manner that we are going to teach cannot be this tempurung idea of an education. It has to be a broad-based education. Right? If we force ourselves, 60 years cannot solve the problem of race relation in education, I will tell you 100 years so you will not, because you don't understand that your education was dulu punya 60 tahun, not this Zoom education. This Zoom education has changed everything. Okay, and so we need to have a different way of looking at it. Finally, I also like to say that I always say this in a lot of interviews about unity and all that. I say unity has nothing to do with language lah. Okay, it's how you learn. I learned about treating others with dignity, not from my own religion or from my own race, from Mat Saleh, who became a monk, Buddhist monk. Okay, so I came to that conclusion, and I am at peace with that. I have accorded dignity to every single one that I meet, that I know, in order for me to understand that I am vulnerable. I need others. I need all of you in order to complete myself. And this is an education construct that I think our religious faith have missed and our also public schools, and especially universities to the point of PhD, don't even ask the question. Okay, so this is the awakening, an awakening of not just a spiritual construct, but a political construct that would change the way we live in this world, not just in Malaysia, the way that we live in this world. So tradition is very important for self-awareness, and we must give accord dignity to all traditions. And of course, learning through mother tongue is the only transfer of tradition that is viable, that can be that can help to save the tradition. We cannot have any tradition becoming extinct. That would be a loss to us. How do we teach this attitude? Well, this is the question of perhaps another time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. It's very shocking and also deeply enlightening. Usually in this kind of forum and seminars, we always get into a idea of what is in front of us, and we tend to find solutions and interpretations to it. In this aspect, you have gone beyond and gave a philosophical outlook of what education ought to be, that it is got to be from a global construct, and you have prescribed a new solution, a new direction for Malaysia. If any possibility of you becoming the next education minister, okay, we have to think more intrinsically to see how important it is that your viewpoint can be brought into a greater debate in shaping the future of Malaysia. You have to come back again. We will go on to the next speaker. Helen and Kwa,
Helen?
which one of you would like to prefer to speak?
Helen, you want to go ahead?
Dr. Kwa, you want to go ahead? Or
It's up to you. You can go ahead first. Yeah.
okay. All right. Yeah. Good afternoon. First of all, let me thank LLG for inviting me to share my thoughts at this forum. I didn't prepare a slide today, just some notes. Actually, when LLG invited me for the forum, the title was something else, and later on it was changed to another different one, and now it's different again. So yeah, I was wondering how my thoughts can be relevant. Anyway, the title is Education in a Multicultural and Globalized Society. I suppose it refers to Malaysia. So here you have two words, multicultural and also globalized. As Prof. Tajuddin mentioned about globalization and English. So it is there are these global forces, economic forces, and so on, with internet, social media, and so on, which sort of lead to a certain domination of the space in the cyberspace of English, and even in our society, English is considered very important for social mobility. So yeah, so in a globalized world, we can't do away with English, but we know that China is rising, so perhaps Mandarin is becoming another, language of globalization. And here you have what we call nationalism. How is our national institution and our education policy shaping this society? Now, perhaps I try to pose. I mean, education is very broad. I'm not an educationist, even though I did my undergraduate in education. So I posed my question in the sense of looking at, how education is our education adequate in contributing to prepare our young citizens, you know, in this multicultural and globalized society? So in actual fact, what is the impact of our so-called official language policy? There we don't talk about official culture policy. So perhaps when we talk about official language policy, of course we look at state policy. But at the same time, I think state policy have different impact on different ethnic community in Malaysia. We know that, you know, we have so many ethnic groups in Malaysia, and we have a very special education system in our country. Perhaps I just share a little bit from a scholar, Gilles, and his colleague, which suggests that, you know, among other factors, 3 of the structural factors affects the vitality of ethno-linguistic communities, and we have so many in Malaysia. So the official education language policy actually affect the different ethnic groups in a different way. So the 3 key structure factors are demographic, status, and institutional variables. So I'll leave the institutional variable to the last because that will be our focus. But demographically speaking, of course, you know, we have different ethnic groups. We have, you know, Chinese and Indian groups, which of course cannot be compared with orang asli, which constitute less than, you know, 1% of our population. So demography, group concentration, whether they are geographically concentrated, and also, you know, whether in terms of their birth rate and whether they mix married a lot, all this would contribute to the condition, to what extent the ethnic groups will be impacted by the language policy of the government. And secondly is about status. Yeah, to what extent the group, in terms of economic status, in terms of social status, you know, those groups with stronger economic status could be more incapable of responding to challenges, and those and social status is very often linked to economic status, and sometimes also in terms of language. Yeah, there are academics also did studies on the impact of the education policy on different ethnic groups, and one of the study was comparing, for instance, the impact of this on Iban community and Chinese community, and it sees, you know, different type of impact because Chinese, as you know, Mandarin is also considered, you know, a global language in this age of, you know, Chinese domination and so forth. Now, lastly is about institutional support, but institutional support also have formal and informal, which means non-states and, you know, community or regional support. So it depends on how organized the group is in terms of their representation at decision-making level in government, educational and linguistic policies. You know, we have Mandarin, Tamil, Semai, Iban, and Kadasan Dusun as the language of examination. That actually does make a difference. So these institutional factors affect also the status of language and in terms of the vitality of the ethno-linguistic community. And you have also private sectors. We know that, you know, in terms of let's say Chinese who come out from you know, Chinese independent school, even though, you know, you can't find job in government, you can still find job in, let's say, you know, Chinese businessman's company and so forth. So all this actually affects, and you have mass media. We have newspaper in Tamil and in Chinese, which is very different from, you know, other smaller ethnic groups which don't have this assets to maintain the vitality of their language. The other thing is the religious institution. Actually, you know, for instance, Iban is used because a lot of them are Christians. So it is used in worship in churches and so on. So all this actually affects the vitality of the language and their survival. Now, in one word, our nation-state project in Malaysia, it is not aimed to preserve or maintain linguistic diversity, but assimilation of language in the long run. I think we can summarize in a way, because there is no special provisions by the state to preserve or maintain, especially minorities languages, to even to have an interest in whether they continue to survive. I was reading a thesis of on Orang Asli education, which was just finished, defended last year, by is a scholar called Surya Anggit. She is an Orang Asli, and she talked about her loss of her identity, when she was put in the asrama, and she tried to sort of survive it by assimilating to Malay culture, and she said she is still struggling to recover her Tamil identity. Yeah. So what I mean is then it's very interesting to read her thesis, and she was talking about how she was trying to see how Orang Asli learn English language, but also other languages. And there are three most important languages I think in most ethnic groups' life. One is your own language, and second is a national language, and thirdly is English, right? So somehow, even though Orang Asli community, for instance, they do badly in most of them in English, but still English is seen as a language of social mobility, of prestige, and Malay is seen as having more value than their own ethnic language. And this is also observed in among the Iban community in another research. So there is this notion of high language and low languages. Your own language normally is considered worth less than the national language, for instance. And and some of the minorities' languages risk disappearing very soon, because we have seen also this phenomena of language shift, language displacement. For instance, Mak Mary, there was a study being done which talk about, they begin to mix Malay words, and slowly this is a process whereby, their language may just become a mixture of Malay and some with some Mak Mary original languages. So in a way, for Orang Asli, actually, language is actually vital. I got this sense in a court case. I think there was a court case whereby the Orang Asli was challenging developers for using their land, and they demand for compensation and so forth. And the judge, in a court, how do you discern whether this person is Orang Asli? One of the things is whether they practice the culture and whether they speak the language. So if they lose the language, they lose their identity, and they lose the land and their livelihood. So here, actually, when you see in that light, the plight of the indigenous people in terms of their language, the survival of their language, is much greater than even Tamil language and Mandarin language, which is institutionalized and whose ethno-linguistic group is big enough to sort of defend themselves. So here, actually, we see that there is a this nation-state project in the Malaysian society is not really, even though we say it's multicultural, we acknowledge this multicultural society, but I do not think that at the moment our official policy is to take this diversity seriously and also to value this diversity. Just now I mentioned about Surya Anggit's thesis. She was also talking about, how orang asli was struggling to in their education, in terms of, we know all this. I think all of us know that in terms of academic underachievement, it is a serious problem among orang asli. But she was also talking about how teachers, are being very culturally insensitive, and their world, their cultural world, their language are not sufficiently being utilized to sort of help them with their learning. And she recommends, for instance, that the teachers teaching this minority, the orang asli, they should be trained to be more culturally responsive, in terms of their knowledge and so on. So from that point of view, actually, instead of, in our Malaysian education blueprint, we talk about bilingual proficiency, but actually from the point of view of ethnic minorities, we should talk about a trilingual proficiency. But proficiency doesn't mean that, everybody should have equal level of proficiency in all the 3 languages. It's impossible. I think statistically speaking, educational, pedagogically speaking, it's not possible. But I think what is more important actually to make sure that the person, when they come out of schooling system, have at least one language in which he or she is very competent, with which she and he can express themselves effectively. I think that is very important. We often talk about multilingual, but in the end, many of the students who come out of our education system, they may know a range of languages, but they are no good in any one of them. They cannot articulate their thoughts, in any one of them properly. Even for me, I supervise postgraduate students. I have encountered Malay students who cannot articulate their thoughts coherently and write a text in a presentable manner in Malay. So this is more than a problem of language. This is a problem of our education system. But of course, we do not go into that detail. But what I mean is, actually, we keep saying, they should be this good at that language. I feel that we need to be realistic. We need to say, we are in a multilingual lingual country. We need to have, of course, Malay. At least the minimum requirement is to, to be able to communicate and understand and so forth in Malay. But it does not have to be the most proficient language. But we should aim that they should be proficient in at least one of the languages, whereby they can express themselves effectively. When you go to a company to work, when you work for someone, you need a language whereby you are competent. This is the most basic. Some of my RAs, they have difficulty to write a formal letter properly. I think, something is not right there. So anyway, I think we also need to look at the pedagogical effectiveness of language teaching, and of course, also about intercultural competency and so on. But that is, besides the point. I finish my presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Helen, for the incisive explanation as to the different communities and the minority languages and the situation arise therein. Actually, it follows from Prof. Tajuddin's prescription that a global construct require a different approach altogether. So in that context, he actually gone into tradition and philosophical outlook of individuals and individual communities and those cultures. And here you came out with a very, very, very incisive explanation as to the ground condition, as how the multilingualism is taking a back seat in relation to the current education system, and minority groups actually losing their identity and their language strength. And also the status of education holistically in this country is also not to our liking from hearing from you. Notwithstanding that the largest and highest amount of allocations and focus is given to our education system. Our Ministry of Education gets a very huge grant annually to run the education, and we are getting this kind of findings which doesn't commensurate with the amount of resources allocated for education. So just about a month ago, when we had a similar topic of discussions, one of the proposal was that persons to lead education shouldn't be a politician. Someone who should be much more can understand the value of education, entrenched into the concept of education and things like that. And education cannot be formalized. It should be decentralized so that it can reach out to greater number of people, to the needs of various what we call diverse background and things like that. It's kind of complementing to what Prof. Tajuddin has earlier presented, all your views from a very micro level analysis. Let us move on to the third speaker, Dr. Kwa. Are you ready, Doctor?
Yes.
Yep. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Aru. Professor Tajuddin, Helen, Dr. Helen Ting. It's good to spend this Saturday afternoon with all of you. First of all, I must with the anniversary of Operation Lalang coming up, I don't feel very comfortable when Aru describes me as a ferocious whatever it was, because I was detained for being a threat to national security. But I'm sure I don't look like a threat to national security. I agree totally with what Professor Tajuddin and Dr. Helen Ting have said, but I'll try to be more topical this afternoon. Today, I think we're celebrating. This calls for celebration because it's the 120th birth anniversary of the late Lim Lian Geok, and we're celebrating also more than 200 years of Chinese and Tamil education in this country. This is all cause for celebration. At the same time, we know that it's a time of grief because we are commemorating the 60th anniversary of Lim Lian Geok's revocation of his citizenship. And you'd be surprised that even up to today, the question of the recognition of the Unified Examination Certificate of the Chinese secondary schools is still not recognized. And it's not a coincidence because Lim Lian Geok had his citizenship revoked for challenging the Rahman Talib report of 1960, which was incorporated in the Education Act of 1961, which was the death knell for Chinese secondary schools at the time. And the independent schools today came about after 1961. I mean, they existed before, but then they became independent. They had to be self-supporting after 1961. So it's interesting that the 60th anniversary of Lim Lian Geok's citizenship revocation coincides with the time when the recognition of the UEC is still an issue, with another general election coming up. You'd be surprised that since independence in 1957, the Chinese schools, the recognition of the UEC, etc., has been an issue in every general election since independence. So with that, we can still talk about how mother tongue education is today as relevant as it was at the time of independence, at the time of Lim Lian Geok. In fact, when we look at 1957, at the time they had more Chinese schools than we had today. In fact, we had more secondary Chinese schools than we had today because we had about 78 secondary Chinese schools. And many people do not know this, but at independence in 1957 up to 1961, the government of the Federation of Malaya actually ran the Chinese secondary school examinations. Today we are talking about recognizing the UEC, which is run by the Dong Jiao Zhong, which is associations of the Chinese society. And so, first of all, it's a question of heritage that Malaysians should be proud of. Recognizing more than 200 years of Chinese and Tamil education in this country. Every day in the newspapers, we have politicians and all talking about how we have to preserve our heritage. And so the first Chinese primary school and the first Tamil education system in this country was in 1819, at the time before the British came to this country, And the first Chinese secondary school was in 1918. It was just at the end of the First World War. And you'd be surprised also to know that Lim Lian Geok, today, many Malaysians don't know him. His citizenship has been revoked. But if you look, people of his generation will know that he was such an important man in his time, that he was representing the Chinese community at the Malacca talks with the Tunku, talking about what the independence constitution and the independence education policy was going to be. And that was how important he was. And but at the same time, I'd like to tell you that I interviewed him for my book on the Chinese schools in Malaysia. And he was a very humble man. He was first and foremost a unionist. He was a teachers union unionist. A very humble man. Towards the end of his life, he was living a very simple life in Setapa. And but during his time, I think remember in 1956, he was asked to write a Hari Raya message to the Malay community by Utusan Melayu. And this is something which you never dream of today. You don't dream of the chairman of Jiao Zhong or the chairman of Dong Zhong being asked to write a message to the Malay community, either in Jawi or in Bahasa Malaysia in the Malay papers. So the question of the heritage of mother tongue education in this country is very important. And so Lim Lian Geok, at the time of his importance, was encouraging the Malay community to set up Malay secondary schools, which didn't exist before independence, if I'm not wrong. And he also encouraged the Tamil community, the Tamil education lobby in this country, to defend and to develop the Tamil education in this country. I think learning efficacy, the second point I'd like to bring up is the question of learning efficacy, which Dr. Helen Ting has brought up, and the fact that Mother Language Day is recognized by the United Nations, the fact that you have a United Nations Universal Declaration on Linguistic Rights in 1996 in Barcelona is proof that the question of learning efficacy is very important. And I think Helen reminded us of its importance to the Orang Asli. Do you remember the tragedy in the Orang Asli school in Perak, where some Orang Asli children had to flee to the jungle because they're so afraid of going to the school, the national school. And this is the importance of if the Orang Asli children can be made to feel at home in an environment in which their mother tongue was being taught, preferably in Metaslip, if their teachers were of their own people, that would be even a bit better. And so that learning efficacy is very important. And many people, I've seen, in fact, I was in a forum the other day in which an academic who had Chinese secondary school education was saying, oh, we don't really care very much now about whether the UEC is recognized or not. But the point is mother tongue education is important for, not just for the middle class, it's important for the B40, people who do not have the convenience of having either Malay or English as a second language or first language in the home. And that is why mother tongue is very important for them to survive in the first primary school. And the third point I'd like to make is the question of inclusivity, a point about unity that Professor Tajuddin and Helen were talking about. And And I would think that mother tongue in this country should really include English if people's home environment, their mother tongue in the house when they're born in Petaling Jaya or Johor Bahru or Malacca or Penang is English. It should be allowed. It should be allowed to have English as the mother tongue. And so, so the question about inclusivity, the question of unity, is that if you can recognize certificates like the UEC certificate, you can be, the graduates from the Chinese schools can be accepted into the tertiary institutions in this country. They can be accepted into the civil service in this country, and then in that way you'll be promoting integration amongst other Malaysians. And there's a lot of hypocrisy involved in a lot of this as well, because when you think of the number of UEC graduates in this country, they're not many. There's something like 85,000 students in Chinese secondary schools. What is 85,000? There's more than 100,000 students in Mara, in UITM campus throughout Malaysia. So if you're talking about integration, you're talking about promoting integration, mixing of people. You have all the students in UITM who are completely Bumi Putra, and nobody makes a fuss about it. But you have 85,000 Chinese secondary schools with hundreds of Malays and Indian and Chinese, mixing with no problem, with no objections, you know. So what are we talking about? We have international schools in this country which use English, you know. We have religious schools in which Arabic is an important language. We have UITM in which English is seen as where English is the main medium of instruction. So what are we talking about? Why should Chinese? I remember when Dr. Mahathir said that the UEC could not be recognized. This was when he became the second time Prime Minister in this country. He said that the UEC could not be recognized because it is still a sensitive issue with the Malays. Why should the UEC be sensitive for the Malays when English is not sensitive? Why is when the A levels and the O levels and the international schools are not a sensitive issue with the Malays? You know, there's something not right there. But I agree that we need to promote all kinds of facilities to allow for integration. And in this way, I would like to propose that the Chinese community, the Tamil community, and the Malay community would go for what I call education precincts, in which all existing schools, Chinese schools, Tamil schools, Malay schools, can all be sharing common facilities like very good libraries, very good IT centers, very good sport facilities, very good theaters, and in which all of them can use, but which all of them can also compete, you know. That will be encouraging interracial integration. But for this to happen, one important condition is also for education in this country to be depoliticized, deracialized. Ever since 61, we find that education has always been a political football, and you know, every general election, the government of the day will be giving out a few schools to the Chinese community, to the Tamil community, usually no more than 10, you know. And that is why the total number of schools, Chinese and Tamil schools in this country, still do not exceed the total numbers that were existing at the time of independence in this country. But for these to be depoliticized, an important political institution needs to be reintroduced in this country, and that is the question of local council elections. That was done away with when Indonesia launched its Konfrontasi in 1963. Local elections were abolished in 1965. If we reinstate local council elections, schools will be built in each local locality based on need. So in any particular locality, if they want Chinese schools, they get Chinese schools. If they want Tamil schools, they get Tamil schools. If they want English schools, they get English schools. If you want Malay schools, they get Malay schools. And so that is the way it should be done, not politicized, not decided by the Ministry of Education. And it's important that management of schools, management of education is decentralized. It should not be centralized by the Ministry of Education. And this is where a local community can play a part in the way education is run, in the way housing is done, in the way that even policing is done. And I remember, was it Professor Tajuddin or Helen was talking about the mother tongue education of people like the Orang Asli, the Ukits and the Penans. There's a lot to do with, Helen was bringing up the case about Orang Asli fighting for their land. And I always think that one of the worst things that Dr. Mahathir ever did was to disband the people, the Orang Asli, 15 communities of indigenous peoples in the Bakun area to the Sungai Asap resettlement scheme, involving 10,000 people, including the Ukit, Kalabit, etc. The Ukit, according to an anthropologist in Malayan University, Dr. Shanti, Ukit is the only community in this world. And by displacing them to the Sungai Asap resettlement scheme, which I had visited, which Dr. Mahathir to this present day has not even visited, I can see the process of ethnocide. The process of ethnocide was already beginning 6 months after they were displaced. And so this is the way in which mother tongue, I remember somebody was talking about the traditions. It's not just the language, it's the traditions, I think Professor Tajuddin was talking about. Mother tongue education is very combined, is an important part of traditions. And I'm very happy that I think Dong Zong is organizing the Mother Tongue Education Conference of Malaysia's ethnic minorities, which was a conference that I initiated in 1997. This is a follow-up conference. And there we will see how mother tongue education of other than Chinese and Tamil, also of the indigenous peoples in this country, has been getting along ever since 1997 that we did the conference. So amongst all these, I remember in the last general elections, an issue like arose about the question of 1,000 dilapidated schools in Sarawak. Today we're talking about MA 63 in the Malaysia Agreement. But today they're talking about all kinds of things, but we still have a question of more than 1,000 dilapidated schools in Sarawak. Will the next budget be allocating more funds to rebuild these dilapidated schools in Sarawak? Do people in West Malaysia care enough to lobby the Ministry of Finance to increase the allocation for these dilapidated schools in Sarawak? You know, so these are questions that I think they need at least 3 billion ringgit. The Ministry of Finance better take notice of this. When there's no imminent election, people forget about this. When an election comes, especially when the Sarawak election comes, then they'll be promising this and that. But it's never enough. Okay. So I think I'll stop here. I think the 3 issues I've raised to get about mother tongue education, the question of heritage, the question of learning efficacy, and the question of inclusivity in the promotion of unity in this country are issues that we should really think about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Soong. There are at least 2 points I would like to clarify with you. For example, if we were to make like English medium schools, like that's one of your idea of introducing English medium schools. In India, the introduction of English medium actually wiped out mother tongue education in some states, particularly in Tamil Nadu, because they found that English being the language of the commerce, they are more like likened to go to that school rather than going to Tamil schools. Similarly, even in Malaysia, if there were to be a English medium schools close by, they will choose to send to English medium schools, then to Tamil schools, not because they don't like Tamil. They feel that English is a language of commerce. So the economic gain that they can acquire through that kind of language, the parents tend to choose to put their children in there. The good example was when the PPSMI was introduced, the enrollment in Tamil schools dropped. And the performance not necessarily will improve in relation to children going to schools where they teach science and mathematics in English. In fact, they will do much worsely, but parents chose that medium. So there is one thing that cannot balance with what Prof. Tajuddin was talking about, how heritage is important, how culture is important, how we should build a dignity through that process. Here, the kind of education has become commercialized. It's a commodity. It's something that you need to acquire kind of a certification at the end of the tunnel so that you technically qualified as educated to look for a job. So it's all linked up with the market demand of certification and job. The other issue is the concept of having schools where you can have different ethnic groups learning together. I think that Wawasan school concept was introduced. Somehow, I think it probably one of the good model, but we didn't really get to experience the survival of that model. Number of schools were built, and then the government didn't pursue further. I think there are few schools existing. Probably a research maybe needed some kind of a small study to find out the impact of putting different schools together in a single compound where they can share the playground, library, and resource rooms together, so that they can building up a communal contact together. Having said that, maybe Soong, you can add later. Let us go back to Prof. Tajuddin. Based on that differing viewpoints, not really differing, but rather arguing on the current context itself and relating to your prescription that education is a global construct and should deal from the perspective of dignity and traditions. How do we reconcile these differences, given that we have a system like a fixed kind of system in which there is a ministry, there is a minister, then there is a whole set of civil servants working, and they have gone through now 60 years, 2 generations of ideological development within them. How are we going to reform education in Malaysia, looking at the current context of even we are, however well-meaning we are, where do we start and how do we progress from here? I think this is one of the questions that even the audience would want to hear. I mean, it sounds nice to hear about very, very gloated, very beautiful things, but how do we put into practice so that we can visualize and we can realize this vision of seeing Malaysia with bubbling young kids who whichever language they speak, whichever culture they come from, they tend to acquire the skills, the necessary imagination, the necessary creativity, and face the needs of the future demands of market force. Yeah, Prof, would you like to comment?
Oh, yes. Well, the fact that the professor of architecture is talking about this thing here says a lot about what is it that we have with regard to our so-called professors. We have been giving an attitude. There are many what I call narratives or attitudes that is going around in this country that are creating what I call boxes. And one of my articles is going to be called "Creating the Boxes of Our Minds," and later on our souls. When we look at our professors, so the first thing in order to have this is a person who is enlightened. You can have all the agencies you have, nothing is going to work unless and until someone becomes enlightened enough to actually say that who he or she is with regard to his race construct, with regard to his religious construct, that this is a small thing. This is a small thing in a larger construct. That's number one. Number two, whatever the world is, and whatever you are in your religious construct, racial construct, political construct, educational construct, you need this as a complementary, as a complement to your existence. Now, unless and until we have the so-called educated professors having their heads out of the tempurung, so they are the ones that are in the tempurung and keeps getting promoted when they are in the tempurung, we will never go anywhere, because which authority is going to tell the politician who are supposed to be our representative? Who is going to say that? Now we have our religious what we call clerics, and I'm not referring only to Muslim. Okay, if you check and look at your other religions, look at the manner in which they teach. I wrote an article in the Star about rethinking religious education. I wrote 5 elements in which we need to rethink. The Star published only 4 because the number one element about God is too controversial for us to publish. Yeah, so they published this 4 rethinking. Number one, I said in that article, is we actually in our education we try to create a safe box. Okay, the safe box of being a Malay, this is the safe box. The safe box of being a Muslim, this is the safe box. The safe box of being an architect, this is the box of architect. This is the box of engineering. This is the box of all these are boxes. We do not teach our children to face challenges that are not in the boxes. So first of all, we create the boxes, which I call the safe boxes, and then we educate people to sit in that safe boxes. And most of these safe boxes is stay within your own faith and people like you. Because if you sit with somebody else, you are going to get astray. Now, so some people say, well, of course, I say, yeah, lah. When your child is a baby, I also create a lot of safe boxes for my child. But then when they grow up, takkan you nak buat macam tu juga, you know? But apparently, the politicians are an expert in creating these boxes, and our people, even though having PhDs and become professors, believe in these safe boxes. We need to be in this safe box. Okay, so here is a situation where the most unenlightened people are in the university. Okay, and if you look at the university, look at the promotion process, it's all related to, oh, you must write for your journal, and your age index related to your journal, and your research grants related to this. I'm sick of it. And I can see the fall of this country. And I told many journalists who disbelieve me, I said the fall of the country is not about political parties. Political parties are just small children squabbling here and there. It is the university. If the university falls, and I mean that they do not understand the role of knowledge, the role of being enlightened, the role as if you are having more knowledge, you become what we call in Malay berlapang dada, having wisdom, having the generosity, having this attribute does not exist in our intellectual culture. Tak ada. Okay, look at some of these professors from the International Islamic University. They love talking among themselves, but they don't come out into the open to discuss issues that directly affect a majority of people in this country. They keep in their safe room, where after this they will get appointed to Tan Sri, to senatorship, to tone this and tone that. They don't know the sanctity and the sacredness of knowledge. And the first rule about knowledge is that it must be shared. And this is an Islamic well, from my understanding, why I'm here is because of my understanding of an Islamic responsibility that set me on the path to what we call an awakening, and of reading other cultures and all that. So unless and until the revolution comes with understanding that the universities are the the thing that must be done, Aru, is for you to call upon these professors of social science, these professors of education. How come there's not a single educationist here in the panel? Soong is not an educationist. Helen Ting is not an educationist. I am the furthest from being an educationist. Kenapa tak ada all these education people sini? Because they are all tempurung. And fine, kalau they are tempurung, then you must ask them the right, the hard questions. Why this global education like this? Why this and that? Why that? And this is the way and the manner in which you have to shape these professors. Of course, some say, well, we need to change the political party, a political thing, put somebody there, put his, even if you put me in the Ministry of Education, it's not going to happen, because this is a cultural revolution. Okay, it's a cultural revolution. It's not a policy change thing. Okay, unless and until the vice chancellors of all these universities, and now the private university also now sudah kena the virus of the public university, where promotion is related directly to you are specific to your own, but not the idea of this person becoming wider, more wisdom, having an engineering professor talking about the fate of orang asli. Do you have an engineering professor talking about the fate of orang asli? Tak ada. Unless and until you have that, forget it. We're not going to go anywhere. Go into all your forums and go into all the political parties to promise the UEC to be recognized and all that. It's not going to happen, because the attitude is in the small box. We call it creating the safe box. To me, the most unsafe place should be the university. I said that many times. The university is the place of questions. It is never the place of answer. Once a university is a place of answer, then tutup the university, because it's got nowhere to go. University is a place of questions, because that is the boundary of knowledge. And the university is a place of experimentation, of response, not of answers. And that is the only way that we have to go. Well, here, oh, you complete your degree, you complete your PhD, you complete your 6 journal paper, and then these boxes we create ourselves. There is not enough pressure from society to tell the universities, you people are putting us in difficulty because you don't have any ideas at all. Okay, and we are expecting ideas from you. And so unless and until we have a group of enlightened clerics who talk in their sermon, if I would, and one of the focus areas that I'm doing is the Friday sermon, because and comparing it with Singapore, comparing it with Melbourne and things like that, to look at aspects of nation building. So you can also see the same thing in other perhaps other religion, how they sermonize their people, and without them understanding the wider picture of things, they create these safe boxes and create the isolation from each one of us, to the extent that we do not respect or give dignity to other traditions, which include faith, race, culture, even lifestyles, LGBT and all that. All these are out of the boxes, and they are unsafe. So this is the attitude change in education that we need in order to be a global citizen. We don't talk about Malaysian citizen anymore. We shouldn't. And so this is where the trap lies. We have expired our education curriculum a long time ago. Okay, so with the handphone already expired. Okay, so
Bro, you are radicalizing the speakers also now. Your prescriptions are revolutionary. I hope we get a large number of young audience listening to your speeches, your ideas, so that we can rise to the occasion. It's very, very innovative, and it's refreshing to hear. But we need to have a starting point. There are two questions in the chat box. Maybe Soong, you can answer this. How local council election can help to increase the number of Chinese and Tamil schools? Essentially, maybe the question is, if we were to hold local council election, would there be a possibility that number of Chinese schools and Tamil schools can be increased? I can answer on the part of Tamil schools. I don't think Tamil schools need to be increased. We need to safeguard the existing number of Tamil schools and improve enrollment, but I'm not sure about Chinese schools. That is question one. Then second question is, at present, SRJKC has 18% of them non-Chinese people. Do you think these schools can help to reduce racial polarization? Essentially, the question is something like, can Chinese schools become the schools of choice for a multiracial student group? It's something like that. Would any one of you wish to comment on that?
I would like to answer the second one, but I thought you were asking.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Do you know, this is a very interesting question. I asked the Dr. Tan Yusing, mana dia list nama semua budak-budak Melayu yang pergi sekolah Cina? I asked him. He said, well, we don't have it. He said, why don't you have it? This is the bridge. This is the bridge between civilization. Okay, why don't you keep that list next time in the future now?
I will ask for the list.
Yeah, keep that list. Stay close to these people. All right, and if you can have scholarships, or you know, offer them scholarships to go to study about, let's say, engineering in China. Okay, and others also in Japan, in other countries other than, you know, they have Muslims and things like that. Then you create a global Melayu, which is something which I've been trying to tell. Well, now I'm talking to one or two senior UMNO politicians. I didn't think that I would be able to do that. To say that, look, you're trying to say Melayu asal, UMNO asal, forget about these things. We're going to talk about Melayu global. If you don't want to talk about Melayu global, then you're still talking about Melayu in that safe box. I don't want Melayu to be safe. Okay, so this is the element. We have to build the bridge, and the bridge are the children, and one of those 18% is supposed to be the bridge. And if you don't cultivate them, then you won't have the bridge anymore.
Can I speak?
Yeah, so, yes, so.
No, I'm surprised that Yusing said he didn't have the data, because why don't we have the data? Of course we have the data. I know this kind of data is what Facebook and all that are fighting for. You know, it's very precious data, and it should be around. Why should the data be around in Chaozhong and Tongzhong? It should be there. I don't see why. But this question of what Professor Tajuddin was talking about, when I was principal of New Era College, we had exactly what you said. You know, we had scholarships for non-Chinese, because Chinese were a majority there. We had scholarships for non-Chinese, or Malays and Indians. You know, we would sometimes make it a point in the vicinity of Kajang to go to the secondary schools there to ask people to come to New Era College so that we could give them scholarships. And I know that as a Chinese primary school in where I live here in Hulu Langat, Orang Asli have been given scholarships to go to Chinese secondary school in Hulu Langat here. But this kind of data is variable. I don't see why it should be lost, you know. And it's a pity that it's not more use is made of this data, you know. Okay, and I'm not sure if Professor Tajuddin knows about the song "Little Boxes" by Woody Guthrie, the famous American. You know, he had his book called famous song called "Little Boxes," exactly in the definition and in the spirit of what you're talking about. So if you go to either Google or YouTube, you can hear the song, and it says precisely what you're talking about. Okay, Aru, you're asking about this question of English schools. It's not a question of having. the reason we're having local council elections is that the local council elections would first have a survey to find out which language and what demand people have for their mother tongue. So it's not for everybody who want to build English schools, no. If they can show that English is their mother tongue, which you probably find more in Petaling Jaya and Johor Bahru and Malacca and Penang, you're not going to find English as a mother tongue in Kelantan or in Batang Berjuntai or somewhere, you know, where different people live. So they have to prove that English is their mother tongue. So Aru, you don't have to be so apprehensive that everybody's going to go into English schools. I don't think that has to happen by the local council. The local council mainly does a survey to find out which mother tongue is used in their schools and why they want an English school. And they say, oh, because English is the mother tongue in our house. That's the way. The question of wawasan schools. When I mention education precincts, the education precincts are not sekolah wawasan. The Chinese Dong Xiaozhong opposed wawasan schools because wawasan schools meant that the Chinese schools and the Tamil schools lost their autonomy. You had one headmaster for all the schools, different language medium schools. But I'm talking about the existing schools and any future Chinese and Tamil schools or indigenous language. They have the autonomy. You still have your schools. You still have your headmaster in your own headmasters. But for all future new schools, you group them in education precincts. And you have super IT centers, super sports facilities for all the children in that area to use. And that is all there is. It is not a wawasan, sekolah wawasan at all, And for existing schools, I don't know what can be done, but we can still have shared facilities. There's no reason why we can't have a super library for.
I think cikgu exchange would be a priority rather than infrastructure cost, because then the teachers would be in the different
but it's mainly for the pupils to have interaction rather than teachers can easily have interaction, but for students to have interaction, there is no reason why they can't even have. You can go to KLCC and go to the canteen there. Why can't you have a kind of canteen where all students can go to? That kind of stuff.
Well, I come from a family, when I married into my wife, a lot of teachers, they're all racist to the core. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a different.
Yeah, that's why I said that the teacher comes first. If you don't have the right attitude of a teacher, who looks at children as his or her children. There was this guy who goes around looking at people living under the bridges. Don't care what race it is. It's just terbiar. Then I'm going to take that time.
I think we got a point.
Yeah. At the same time, we have Olympics, a world scale Olympics. We have Asian Games, and we have why can't we have games involving schools in Ulu Langat, for example? All the language schools in Ulu Langat. Is it difficult?
So they do have MSSM and sports and all that. They do have, but not the way that the interaction is that much. It's only selected athlete will participate in MSSM sports.
Right,
they do have that, but I think that is very remote. It can't build that kind of things. Helen, there is one question here from Geok. She says the position of Orang Asli language is worrying. Is there any solution to help to arrest the issue? It means she's talking about the Orang Asli's language, their language is probably disappearing. So what kind of solutions do we have in terms of protecting minority languages? After your response to this, I would like to invite each one of you to, if you were to give, say, 2 or 3 prescriptions about how the education system can be remodeled to address the multiculturalism and multilingualism, what would you like the education minister to perform? What kind of things you want them to perform? Something like you can give 2 or 3 ideas as a concluding remark in relation to this forum. Otherwise, we have gone into a very philosophical, broad-based approach in dealing with the topic today. But essentially, in line with that as well, we need to kind of how do we like tell the audience, okay, if you were to be one of you were to be the education minister, what kind of prescription would you give the government, say 2 or 3? So before you come out with that, Helen, would you like to say how to protect the Orang Asli language?
Yeah, I think Orang Asli is a very heterogeneous group. There are bigger ones in which their language is still quite vital, but there are smaller groups. And I'm not specialist on Orang Asli, so I can't give you any solution. But I mean, in the thesis, one of the government they do regroup some of those whose UPSR results are good into a special school. Actually, they are high-performing students, but the thing is, the government policy does not seem to be sensitive to the cultural and linguistic aspects of Orang Asli. This, I think, we probably need more community awareness and mobilization, so that we can sensitize our politicians to this type of need. But I think the more pressing issue is probably the cultural sensitivity of teachers to the Orang Asli kids, because I think I read some time ago of a newspaper report even that a student was slapped because he didn't understand Malay, which is really terrible. Yeah, but what I mean is, the thing is, all things starts with respect and understanding of their issues.
I see. Okay, thank you very much, Helen. Who would like to start in giving the prescriptions? Pro.
Yes. Of course, the thing that I said was is a philosophy construct, and this philosophy construct can be well, not taught. I don't like to use the word teach. Can be shared with a group of teachers, and if the ministry was interested in unity at all, which I don't think they are, I would recommend that they would put, let's say, train something like 500 teachers in a manner in which you put it in batches of, say, 50 each, where you would take the teachers from public schools, Malay, Chinese, Indians, Kadazans, whatever, from the madrasah school, from the vernacular schools, all the schools, and put them together in a 1 week camp where they eat together, sleep together, and then they listen to the lectures and sharing of knowledge from people outside of Malaysia, with the intention of sending a single message that you need each other in order to survive in the new world. And that in order to survive in the new world and in order to cooperate with each other, you need to accord dignity to each tradition and each culture. Only by having them understand this, then only they can trickle down this message to the student body. Never mind what political party, don't worry about those political parties, this is not important at all. Okay, in a few decades time, this virus will trickle to the students and then trickle to the generations that will then form the new political parties that has the right attitude. And that is very simple for you to do. But I don't think that the government will do that, because our political parties depend on us being enemies of each other. But I've always said in my article, the Building a Parallel Malaysia, that this job must be with us, the civil society or the Malaysian people, because I do not think that this government or any government in the future will take on this suggestion. So if we can have the volunteer teachers by having them a certain, giving them certain allowance and things like that for them to spend a week, and then having them to spend another week living with each other, in a kind of a camp situation where they learn about each other. Then we will see Malaysia changing and moving into a different direction. Without that, change whatever policies you want, nothing is going to come about.
Thank you very much, Prof. So, would you like to?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, the question of mother tongue education, mother tongue should be emblazoned in the education blueprint. It's not. You have things in the education blueprint like belief in God. I don't see how belief in God has to do with the philosophy of education in this country. The question of mother tongue education and how is a human right should be emblazoned in the education blueprint. Second, I think I've already addressed this question of how important it is to have local council elections, because they were taken away at confrontasi and never brought back. Royal commissions have recommended they be brought back, but they've never been brought back. So that, in fact, recently we're talking about the UEC task force. What is to prevent the government from ignoring the UEC task force on the UEC recognition? They can say, they can just forget it. And the question of local council, like I said, is linked to the question of education precinct to promote integration. And the third thing, of course, is you need to have support for real support for mother tongue education for the different stages. For example, the Chinese schools have got their secondary level, but their UEC is not recognized. The Tamil education does not have the secondary level, which they could develop. And then the Iban, the Dayak, the Kadazan, the Murut, etc. The others like the Penang and the Ukit, some way in which their mother tongue can be developed in teaching colleges, etc. And their own native speakers are encouraged to go back as teachers to their settlements. I think these are all important ways in which mother tongue education can be developed. And of course, allocation, financial allocation. At each budget, I don't. No economist in this country has calibrated how much tax, a second tax the Chinese community has forked out all these years since independence, in addition to the education allocation by the ministry. I know, because when I was the principal of New Era College, how much money we have to put in to subsidize the tertiary education. How much money is used to subsidize the independent schools. How much money is used to develop the Chinese primary schools and the Tamil schools. So, I mean, if mother tongue education was part and parcel of the education philosophy of this country, then we do not have to have all this continual politics at elections, asking for money, asking for schools, asking for recognition of a certificate, etc. And that will at least make the country move forward without all this ridiculous politics. You asked a question about, somebody asked a question of how could local elections increase Chinese schools or Tamil schools. Of course it will straight away, based on the election, based on the survey of the community. For years that the Johor Bahru community was asking for additional schools and they never got it. For years the Malacca schools have been asking for additional schools and never got it. So definitely it'll increase the number of schools. Can you imagine, at independence we had more schools than we have today, when the population of the Chinese and the Tamil and the Indians was half what it is today. There were more schools in 1957 than there are today. I think in Tamil schools, you had 800 over Tamil schools and independence. Today, you have 500. So with this new method, through local elections, definitely you will have more schools. Okay.
Thank you, Soong. Helen?
Yeah, I will just focus on two. One is actually there has been initiatives, community initiative by Orang Asal and Orang Asli, who had developed so-called preschool or early education, especially preschool sort of, to educate their children and prepare them for the formal education. But the thing is, this type of thing needs state funding. Community can only do this much, and I believe that it is time, perhaps we need to do an assessment of how some are more effective than others. But even among Orang Asli, I was told also that there are initiatives among Orang Asal in Sabah and Sarawak also. The thing is, they are all sort of isolated, working in isolation. And I have read that some of them, they cannot expand further because of funding issues and so on. So I think during the Mother Tongue Education Conference, we are going to hear more from this type of experience. But hopefully the government can look into this, because I think from the little I know is this type of preschool setting helps. They get involved, the community leaders. So the community leaders will come and tell their stories, and pass on their cultural and their historical heritage. And at the same time, they get the elders in the community involved. So actually, it's a very good way of strengthening the local communities, but also to sort of help prepare the children, not only to strengthen their own language, but also to prepare them for Malay language education. Of course, ideally speaking, if they can make this further, I don't know politically it's possible, but it would even be better. So one thing is to look into the preschool thing to support this type of community initiative, so that they can start their learning using the language they understand. It may not be their mother tongue per se. For instance, in one area, it seems Khmer is sort of the dominant language, and even those other smaller groups, they know Khmer. So that could be the language, because this is the way, for instance, in the Philippines, they have implemented mother tongue education. They do it this way because there are so many languages, but at the same time, the children know more than one indigenous languages, and they sort of map out the local languages and use a language the children understand. And that is the key thing about, whether it's mother tongue or not, that is another matter. But when there are too many, this could be the way forward. But secondly, I think it's very important for us to look at Malay language proficiency, but we should see that issue as a pedagogical issue. It should not be seen as a political issue, as an issue of national unity. That it has nothing to do with national unity. Malay language proficiency is a pedagogical issue. To what extent does our schools, the teachers and also the curriculum, are properly equipped to help our young citizens, to be able to operate in very, the basic essentials to be able to operate in a Malay language environment. This is vital, and it is not a national unity issue. I want to repeat, it is a pedagogical issue, because we have seen the experience in other countries whereby using mother tongue education does not impeach the children from learning a second language, even a third language. But even though we have this mother tongue education in Malaysia, but in actual fact, I do not think that we have maximized the potential of mother tongue education, even in Chinese and Tamil schools, because we are hampered by this political issue, and we fail to look at the pedagogical issue. There are also issues in Chinese schools, in Tamil schools, but the problem is with all this political deadlock, we cannot resolve all these issues to push our nation forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen. We should take up some ideas from this forum. Maybe LLG can look into initiating whether we can ever get 500 teachers from all over the place to put together to experiment Prof. Tajuddin's idea of sharing. But I think the 1 week is not enough. 1 week they end up most of the time praying.
Doing in 50 in the batches, not at one time.
Batches, yeah, okay, that's a good idea actually. We can even try with students, children together, combine camps to inculcate differentiating, learning from different cultures and all that. That's a good idea. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the listeners and the participants of the forum, as well as the speakers. And incidentally, the LLG Cultural Development Centre's core values goes in line with today's forum, that I can read it to you: to uphold the principles of democracy, human rights, and respect for individualities and ethnic diversities. Cherish a culture of solidarity, friendship, cooperation, and constructiveness. I think that's quite complete in the sense of just in 3 sentences, they summarize the entire discussion of ours of how we would like to see the country to become. With that, thank you very much. I pass the floor back to the organizers from LLG.
Okay, thank you, Mr. K. Arumugam. So many thanks for our panelists here. Thank you for sharing. Okay. To our audience also, thank you for staying with us and engaging this forum. So once again, I hope our future forum we can see you all at the next LLG event. See you soon, and thank you and goodbye.